Okay, so today we're doing the Arizal's Tamei Hamitzos on the mitzvah of korbanos. And I think this is very interesting, an interesting piece, just because the idea of the korbanos is something that, that some people find difficult. The Rambam, of course, it's famous, the Rambam explained korbanos away in a very interesting type of a way, sort of wrote it off. Like, because of course, he comes with a kasha. Why does Hashem need us to burn offerings to him? Hashem doesn't eat food, and Hashem doesn't need physical things, right? So the Rambam came with the approach that be'emes Hashem doesn't need the korbanos. It's just that everyone else is bringing korbanos to their avodah zuras. So Hashem wanted the Klal Yisrael sort of to feel like they're also doing something religious in nature, which is very, very, it's very difficult. Many people had problems with the Rambam when he said that. But the concept of the korbanos aren't really necessary. We see this already. The Nevi'im already are struggling with this. The Nevi'im already say in many places that that Hashem wants better. That person should have should do tshuva and should have a repentant heart than to bring all kinds of korbanos, right? But it must be, if Hashem commanded the korbanos, it must be there's a deep reason behind them, because everything that Hashem commands, obviously, as we know, of course, from Pnimis Torah, that everything that the Torah tells us to do has many multiple layers of meaning and significance in all different kinds of worlds, in this world and in all the worlds above it. So it must be that korbanos also have something very important and significant about them. So the Arizal sort of goes into this here. So let's see. This is Tamei Hamitzos at the beginning, Parshas Vayikra. So it tells like this: mitzvahs korbanos, the mitzvah of korbanos. It says Yediyah, it's known, Kishem Havaya, that the name Havaya is divided into 5 sections. Koitz Hayid, the top little corner of the Yid, He Arich, that's Keser. Yid, the Yid of the Shem Havaya, is Abba. Hai, Ima. Vov, Za. And Hai, Achroina, is Nik. Okay, so that we know, right? That the oasis of the Shem Havaya correspond to the Partzifim. And he tells us, V'hinai kenegdam, and keneged these levels, Bura HaKadosh Baruch Hashem created different levels of reality in our world. Meaning, he says, I'm just letting people in. He says there's doimim, there's inanimate objects, right? That's the lowest level, so to speak, of things that exist in this world. Are the inanimate objects? That's where you connect the higher achroina of the Shem Havaya, that's connected malchus, right? And then there's tzemayach, the plants, and those are connected the vulva of the Shem Havaya, connected za. Then you have chai, living beings, animals, which are connected the high rishon of Shem Havaya, or bina, right? Then you have medaber. Then you have those that are endowed with the ability to speak, meaning human beings, which those are on the level of the yid of the Shem Havaya. And then above that, you have neshama. He says neshama is the highest of all, and that's going to be like connected the keser of the Shem Havaya. So in other words, our physical world has all these elements. There's inanimate objects, and then there's plants, there's animals, there's human beings that speak, and then there's neshama. There's the spiritual element that's in all of creation. And of course, the levels above are going to include the levels below, in the sense that inanimate objects are made up of atoms and molecules, and then plants are also made up of atoms and molecules, except they're one level up. In plants, those cells that are made up of those atoms, right? Those cells have life and they grow, right? And then, of course, you have animals include the level of plants too, because animals also grow, right? Except they have an additional ability, which is the ability to move around, right? And then you have medaber, speaking beings, human beings, have all of those qualities before too. They're made up of atoms, and they grow, and they move around, and they also speak. The highest level, neshama, is a special level of rachnias that the Arizal tells us, of course, every living human being has a neshama of a certain sort. But this level of neshama that we're talking about here, this higher level of neshama, is something special to the Klal Yisrael. And of course, the Klal Yisrael include all those other elements too. They're made up of atoms, and they grow and they move around and they speak, and then they also have that higher spiritual element. Okay, so now he tells us, V'hinai, Mikol Ali Hadal Minim, from all of these four types, and really Be'emes it's five types, right? Because he counted neshama too, right? Yesh Beririm V'tikinim La'alos. There's certain things that have to be elevated from all of those levels of existence, right? So there's levels there's nitzoitzes, in other words, like the Arizal tells us many places that there's repach nitzoitzes, he's going to mention later on in the piece, that you have these nitzoitzes of kedusha that are trapped within the physical world, and they're trapped in all of these levels. They're in the inanimate things, in the plants, in the animals, in the humans, and even on the level of neshama, there's things that need to be elevated, right? V'kali advurim hoy nesaktem al dei hakorban, and all of these things are elevated through the korban. Okay, he tells us, because every korban, of course, includes melach, includes salt, right? And so salt is a mineral. It's an inanimate object, right? He had doimim. So when a person brings a korban, so that animal that's being brought for a korban is salted. That salt gets its taken through the korban. And so that salt elevates netzoitz is trapped in the level of doimim, a level of inanimate objects. And then he says v'soid yain v'shemin, the idea of wine and oil, which are brought with many of the korbanos, right? Nesak and chelkei hatzemayach, those come from plants, and so those elevate the level of plant life, right? The balei chayim kamashmu, and then of course the animal itself elevates the animal world, right? Then he says v'havidi she'uda mizvade ala korban neged medaber, and then of course when the person is bringing the korban, so the kohen is bringing the korban for him, and that person that's bringing the korban is saying vidi, assuming that it's a korban that's that's associated with shiva. So he's doing vidi. He's saying vidi. He's saying al chait while they're bringing the korban, and so that's elevating the level of medaber, the elevating the level of the speaking person, right? And then finally he says the kavunas kohen be'aisa hakrova, and the kavuna, the kohen's intentions at the time he's bringing the korban, neged neshama pnimis. That's neged the level of neshama. So all these levels actually get raised up when the person is bringing the korban. Of course, the kohen's kavona, there doesn't explain what he means. We know in the Gemara already that the kohen's kavona is very, very important, right? If the kohen has the wrong kavona, is bringing the korban, then that korban could be puzzle, right? But of course, probably there was also higher kavonas. The Arizal means also that the kohen was having while he was shechting the korban. So in essence, everything gets elevated through this, right? And he's going to go into it in the next piece. So if we have time permitting, we're going to do two pieces today because they're short pieces. We're going to see a little bit more what's happening to the person when the korban is being brought. But for now, the Rizal is telling us that every single level of creation is elevated through the bringing of a korban. Okay, so he tells of aliyah high oisatikin hadalat oilamis. And then this is going to make a tikkun in all of the oilamis, in all of the worlds. Because of course, if we're elevating all those four levels, or five levels really, of doimim, tzemaya, chai, medaber, neshama, we're elevating all those levels of physical reality, which are five. Those are connected the five worlds, right? Because those, of course, we know that everything parallels. So that's going to be connected asiya and yitzira and bria and atzilus, and the neshama will be connected ak, right? So in essence, the korban that we're bringing down here seems like a physical sacrifice of an animal that the people have problems with because they don't understand why Hashem needs an animal. The results telling us that it's not only just elevating everything that exists in our physical world, but it's elevating things in all the higher worlds too, because everything mirrors each other. Every movement down here, right, has cosmic effects, and every single other olam that's parallel to, right, parallel to olam hazeh. If I move my finger over here, that's moving things in every single world above our world, all the way up to the top, right? So this is what happens when a person brings a korban. He tells us v'ham neranchi. This also elevates all the different levels of the neshama, because then there's five levels of neshama too, right? Which is nefesh, riach, and neshama, chaya, and yechida. Those five levels of the neshama that we're familiar with from Kisvei Arizal, right? All of that's elevated too. So literally, we're elevating everything, right? And this is and for those that that have experience with korbanos rashash, we see this all the time in every mitzvah, in every davening, even in the tikkun shoivavim that we do, right? We're saying that we're not just being misak in one little tiny little element. Every element is connected to every other element. So by definition, we're raising up everything, right? With every action that we do. And so too, I mean, chas v'sholem, we could look at this the other way too. That if a person does actions that aren't right, a person does an avayra or anything like that, then the person is actually not just affecting himself negatively, but he's affecting the entire world and all of the worlds negatively, right? So that just shows us what a responsibility we have, right? And what's really resting on our shoulders. So he tells us
Does
then.
he get punished for that?
Well, yeah, a person gets punished for the avayra, but the reason why a person shouldn't do it is not just because he's afraid of his own punishment, right? He should be aware that really he's affecting everything in a detrimental way, right? So because of that, that should be what holds the person back from doing the avayra. But yeah, okay. So he says, and that's what the pasuk tells us, right? Isha rayach nechoyach laHashem. Referring to the korbanos, the pasuk says, Isha, a fire, rayach, nechoyach, a pleasant smell, laHashem. So he explains each one of the words in these few words here is going to basically refer to one of these levels. So the first word is Isha, which means a fire. It says that's neged a nefesh. That's connected the lowest level, which is nefesh. Shehi nikva, because that's in the kaiva, kuriba isha. That's why it's called isha. Isha means a fire, but also the word isha also means a lady, right? So that's alluding to that lowest level of nefesh, which is connected malchus, which is of course feminine, right? And then he says gam aish, shehi malchus, and also the word aish itself, the word fire itself, refers to malchus, beside aish ochla, because it's it says in what's it called? It says that Hashem is aish ochla, Hashem is a consuming fire. That refers to the level of the Shechina of Malchus. The reason why Malchus is connected to fire is because Malchus is din, right? We know that in the Kaiva is always Bechinas din, and din, judgment, of course, is represented by fire. So the second word there, rayach, a smell, right? He says that's neged riach. That's neged level of riach, which is the second level up, because the word rayach and riach are almost the same. Right? It's from the same shoirish, it's from the same source. So rayach means a smell, but almost the same letters as riach, which means the riach, right? The second level of neshama, which is the yitzira v'zah, and that's connected yitzira in the worlds and connected zah in the partzifim. Then nechoyach, the next little word in the pusik, neged ima, that's ima, neshama lebriya, and she's the level of neshama, and that's the level of bria. Right? The reason why nechoyach is connected ima is because nechoyach is expression of rest and tranquility, right? Which is on the level of ima, because on the level of ima there's no judgments yet. The judgments only start levels of za'anik, which is below that, right? And then the final word la Hashem, to Hashem, neged neshama l'neshama. That's connected the neshama l'neshama, which means chaya, right? Which is abba, and which is connected with atzilus, right? The reason why, by the way, sometimes we find this expression that chai is called neshama l'neshama, okay, is you find this a lot. I mean, you don't find as much in the Arizal. It's interesting that uses it here. It's usually more found in the Ramak, which was before the Arizal. Of course, he had a different nomenclature for many things, and you find a lot of times the Chassidus for him. But the reason why chai is called neshama l'neshama is literally because it's a neshama for the neshama. Because remember, what's a neshama? A neshama is something that is higher than the body, right? So then the body is essentially a vehicle for that neshama, right? Well, the level of chaya, as we know, it does not enter inside the human body at all, right? So how does that chaya connect to the nefesh riach and neshama that are within the person? It's because that chaya is a neshama for the neshama, right? So in essence, the neshama would be like a body to that chaya, right? So that's why chaya is called neshama l'neshama. And he says, "Shal yudai nishlim havaya kila," and through this we have the entire shem havaya in the korban, V'zei soid, and that's what it means, korban laHashem, korban to Hashem, because that korban literally elevates all those four levels, or really five, which are connected the oasis of the Shem Havaya, right? So in essence, the korban is everything, and that's what it means, korban laHashem. Shemakrav dal koiches Havaya kaniska, because what we're doing with the korban is we're elevating, we're drawing close. The word korban is the same word, right, as to come close. Kurov means close, right? Is because the korban itself is we're drawing everything closer to Hashem through the korban. So now he tells us, Vida, you should know, Kikol b'haimas v'chayas v'oifes. All the animals, the domesticated animals and the wild animals and the birds, yeshlem nefesh. They all have a level of nefesh. They all have a life force, obviously, right? Where does that come from, though? So Arizal tells us, Hayeredes v'nishpas mechayas hakodesh. They emanate from the Chayas HaKodesh. The Chayas HaKodesh were the four Malachim that were holding up the Merkava in Yecheskel's vision, in Yecheskel Perek Aleph, right? Where you have the four Chayas HaKodesh, you have the Pnai Arya, the one that had the face of a lion, the Pnai Shor, the one that had the face of an ox, Pnai Nesher, the face of an eagle, and the Pnai Udam. All of them, all of the life force of every single living thing on the planet derives from these four Malachim. That's why they're called chayus, right? It almost sounds odd to translate, the four animals that were holding up the Merkava, and we're talking about them as malachim, right? But that's literally because everything has its life force, has its root in that, right? So he tells us im tohira, if it's a pure animal, a kosher animal, right? Then it comes from Merkava HaKadosh. It comes from the Merkava and the Chayas HaKodesh of level of Kedusha. Im Tamaya, if it's an impure animal, Nishpas Merkava HaTamaya, then it comes from the Merkava of the Sitra Achra, right? So of course, everything parallels each other. So the exact structure that exists in the level of Kedusha will also exist in the level of the Sitra Achra, and the pure chayas come from the ones that are on the Merkava of Kedusha, and the impure chayas come from the ones that are on the Merkava of the Sitra Achra. Which leads us to a question that a lot of the Mefarshim ask on the Arizal is, what do you mean? In Yecheskel's vision itself, one of them is a lion and one of them is an eagle, both of which are not kosher animals. So what does it mean that kosher animals come from the Merkava of Kedusha, and non-kosher animals come from the Merkava of the Timah? When we have in Yecheskel's vision itself, which is for sure of the Kedusha, we have a lion and an eagle there. So it's a difficulty. Some say that the lion and the eagle are special, because the lion and the eagle, despite the fact that we can't eat them, they're not kosher to eat, but they symbolize good qualities, right? The lion, as long as it's not eating you up, right? But the lion symbolizes malchus, kingship, right? It's a very regal type of an animal, right? And the eagle is the most regal of the birds. And Chazal tell us, that we're supposed to emulate their midas, right? The person should be misgaber ka'ari, and to be kal kanesher, right? To be like as strong as a lion and as light as an eagle. So there's certain aspects of Kedusha associated with those animals in particular. But in general, the pure animals come from the side of Kedusha, and the impure animals from the side of the Timah. He tells us, the nefesh habahaima, so the nefesh, the life force of the domesticated animals, yerd mikoyach pnai shor shabamerkava, that will come from the face of the ox face, malach of the merkava, right? Because the ox, of course, is a domesticated animal, right? The chayas, and then the wild animals, mitziras arya shabamerkava, those come from the arya, from the lion, right? Oifes, birds, menesha shabamerkava, that comes from the nesher, from the eagle in the merkava. And then he says, "V'gam nefesh habahamis shabaudam," and also that lowest nefesh, that lowest life force of the human being, right? Nimshachas upnai udam shabamerkava, comes from the face of the human face of those four of the angels and the merkava. Hein the kedusha, hein the timah, and it could come from kedusha or from timah, depending on what that person's nefesh habahamis is. In other words, some people's, even their animal natures, their lowest aspect of their soul is elevated to the level that it could come from the side of Kedusha, and then other people, it would come from the side of Timah. And he says, "Kaniska ba'oirich Parshas Pinchas." And he says the Zohar talks about this in Parshas Pinchas. So he says, "Va'amnam, however, kol ze ane rak b'bchinas chitzonius." All of this, in other words, all of this concept that some might come from the side of Kedushin, some might come from the side of Tima, is only talking about the chitzonius of those neshamas. Ki apnimius kiloi kedusha, because the pnimius of everything is kodesh. Right? In a sense, even a person that's a bad person, chas v'shalom, or even an animal that's an impure animal, right? You can't say that there's nothing inside there that's holy and that's good. Hashem created it. Hashem manifested it. Obviously, it has to happen on the side of kedusha too. So on the side of the chitzonius, it could come from kedusha or from tumah. But on the side of pnimis, everything comes from kedusha. So
No, it's the same thing with like the klipot, like with the klipot, supposed to like raise them up or whatever.
right, right. Well, usually we refer to raise up that spark of kedusha that's within the klippa, right? So that would mean that we have to be aware of the fact that there is that kedusha in there.
Yeah, that's what I mean exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Okay, so now he tells us the misham b'chinas naran hapnimim. So the nefesh, riach, and neshama come from that level. All come from the side of kedusha. Sometimes you can find b'shas ridas nishmas udam rusha. Sometimes when, let's say, an evil person died, and now his neshama is supposed to come back down to the world, right? Tzilas nefesh lebahaima or lechaya. And then at the same time, there's an animal that's being born, a domesticated or wild animal. Markiven nishmasahi betoicha lahanoishoy. Sometimes what? 1 second, let me just quiet things down here. Kinderlech, 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 kinderlech. Je halt me geben a shir and there's a bisschen noise. Okay. Sorry. So what's it called? So so sometimes when that neshama of Arusha is coming down to the world to be brought back into the world again, at the same time there's an animal that's being born. So sometimes what Hashem does is he attaches that neshama into that animal to punish it. In other words, the person was a human being in a previous lifetime, and he wasn't conducting himself the way that he should be, right? So then he has to go through a period where he's incarnated into an animal. And because of that, he realizes that just running after the pleasures. Yeah, I'm gonna. Okay, kinderlich. Ich probiere zu geben das Shiur, aber jetzt gemacht das Sachnoise. Okay, sorry about that. Right, so sometimes that neshama gets put into an animal body, sort of to show him he has to go through an entire lifetime only indulging in the physical world and not being able to do anything higher than that, right? Sort of teach him a lesson, to teach him that this is what you're running after your entire previous life. Now you're stuck with it, right? To teach him a lesson. And it says, "Kefi asher gozim in Shemayim," and this is all decided upon in Shemayim, exactly what each person needs and in what situation, because it's not always like that. Sometimes they'll give another chance as a human being. It'll depend on exactly what Hashem's cheshbon is over here and how Hashem wants to treat this person in his particular situation. For some people, it's good. For some people, it might not be good. But and sometimes this is what happens. So then he tells us, "With this, we can understand also another aspect of what the korban's doing. Because perhaps in that animal that's being brought for a korban, that animal perhaps has a human neshama inside it that's there to atone, right? And then when it's brought for a korban, when the animal is brought and it's elevated, that neshama also gets its tikkun. So that's one of the reasons, another reason of what the korban accomplishes. He says hamakarav rechoikim, because the illusion of korban is to draw close. So sometimes it means to draw close those that are far away. Sometimes there's a neshama that's far away and in an animal and needs its tikkun in this way. But you have all these different stories like this from tzaddikim, right? Where they could sometimes sense this idea. I might be misquoting it because I don't remember it exactly, but there's a story from the Arizal himself that at one point they were davening, and a goat burst into the besmedrash, burst into the shul, and then the Arab came after it. It was an Arab who owned the goat who came running after it. Then the Arizal asked the Arab, "Please let me buy this goat from you." And so the Arab didn't want to sell it, but he told him a good enough price. So the Arab agreed to sell him the goat, and then they took the goat and they shechted it in the kosher way, and they used it for a Chassidus mitzvah or whatever it was. So they elevated that goat, right? Because the Arizal could sense if the goat ran into the shul, that means that there's something going on over here, right? So
It's funny because sorry to cut you off, but I was reading it was either the mitzvah or the day on Chabad.org or the Chayam Yom from the 7th Lubavitcher, and it was saying how don't acquire goods if someone doesn't want to sell them, even if you sell them for a higher price than for an astronomical type of price, which the Arizal did with that goat.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Okay. So he says, "L'pa'umim yikurish in this damen b'mezoynos habahaima," and sometimes it's even worse. Sometimes if the person's really not been good, then Hashem can reincarnate him into a plant, right? So imagine that he doesn't, that neshama is there, and that neshama has the potential for so much, but it can't do anything, can't even move, right? So sometimes it'll happen that, for example, in whatever animals eat, like barley or wheat or whatever it might be, right? That there's a neshama in there. Then the behemoth eats that, right? And then we bring the behemoth for a korban. So then we've also elevated that neshama too, right? So when this karva achakach ala mizbayach, so when that behemoth is then slaughtered on the mizbayach, so that food that he ate, that barley or whatever it was that the animal ate, it became digested and became energy for the animal to live. So it got absorbed, that neshama of that person got absorbed into the animal. And then when it's brought as a korban, then it's elevated. So he says, "V'kishenase ba'avoida hagina," is we do this appropriate avoida of bringing the korban, as karevis l'shorsh of nesaknas. We can bring these neshamas closer to their source and elevate them. So that's another important thing about the korban. He says, "Va'af im ein bebehaima b'chinas gilgul," and even if it's not, even if the animal doesn't have a human soul being incarnated into it, nayesh ba b'chinas repach netzaitzim, it still has those netzaitzes, right? Shenafli v'nishberi, which we have to elevate. Out to the sakni, and we give that its tikkun at the time of the korban. So he says, "V'zay soid trifas v'kshirus," and this is the soid of why some animals are trife, and here trife doesn't mean trife here he means literally, not in the way we use it to refer to like a non-kosher animal. It means the animal that's a kosher type of animal, but it's not fit for eating because whatever, it has a mortal disease, whatever it might be, right? So the reason why some animals were able to eat them, so they after the bedika, after we check them, they're kosher. Other ones aren't. Is going to be associated to this too. He says, "Ki bahaima shenimtza kusher," that bahaima which is found kosher, right? B'toichel udam kosher, and then a proper person eats from it, right? Then simona milsa, so that's a simon. The nitzitz kedusha yeshba, there was a nitzitz kudush in there. For ashrei hamalo and praiseworthy is the one who's able to elevate it, right? So the person eating that behemoth is actually accomplishing a very tremendous thing because he's elevating that nitzitz that's within there, right? And if it's found not to be kosher, right, then simona milsa, then that's a simon, that's a sign. Shadayin loy nitten zman shetaitze mitachas yada klipa. That for that particular nitzitz, there wasn't yet its time to be taken out of the klipa. So, and that's why in this incarnation, it was an animal that was unfit for eating, right? And he says, and this klippa, anikras kelev, the klippa is called kelev, it's called a dog. And that's why it says regarding animals that are not that were found not to be kosher, lekelev tashlichin oisai. The Torah tells us should throw it to the dog. What does that mean? It means that it's still in the dog's possession. It's still the possession of the klippa until Bez Hashem, its next Gilgul. Then it'll Bez Hashem be kosher and be fit for Yid to eat it and to elevate it. right? Achimale onsha, until its oinish, until its time of its atonement is completed. Yigalgal pambais, but behind Mekshar, then it'll be Megalgal again, it'll reincarnate again in a kosher animal. Vechlena udam kosher, and a kosher person will eat it, with a sala and elevate it. Right? There's actually a story like this, a story from the Baal Shem Tov, where there was a person, I think it was like a chuzah from the Baal Shem Tov, that he was like on a boat or something, and the boat capsized. Then he ended up being shipwrecked on this island, and he was so thirsty that he ran to the water and he drank the water without making a bracha. He didn't. He was so desperate, he didn't think of making a bracha. And then somehow he got saved. And he went back to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov told him, "Do you have any idea what happened over there? You know that you were put over there because that water, there was a gilgul in there. I think it might have even been a gilgul of like his father or something, and it was put in that water for you to be able to elevate it when you're at that place, and you didn't make a bracha. You missed out." Right, so it sort of reminds us sort of a little bit of what all of this entails, right? Also similar masa with I think it was the first Bob Varuv, I think, who his son, the Kaddish the second Bob Varuv, once he took an apple and he ate it without making a bracha, or maybe he made the bracha quickly or whatever it was, when he was a child, and his father, the first Bob Varuv, told him, no, that apple, right, ever since the apple tree started to grow, there was a nitzitz in there, and that nitzitz was davening, please, 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 let me be elevated. And finally, the apple tree grew, and the apple started coming out. And that apple was davening, please let my nitzitz be elevated through a Jew who can make a bracha on me. And the baskets of the apples were being collected, and that apple was sitting there in the marketplace. And that apple was asking, please let a Jew buy me so he can elevate me, he can make a bracha on me and elevate me. And finally, when your mother went to buy that apple, then the apple was all excited. It knew it's going to get its tikkun now. Everything's going to be good. And then you bite into it without making a bracha. Right? So we have to sort of think of the more cosmic ramifications of everything that we do. Anyway, okay, so let's see. So then he tells us a sort of a side point, a tangent. He tells us, Azhuras haktoras or v'dvash. Why is it that Hashem does not want yeast or honey in the korbanos? Right? That's what the pasuk tells us. Shneimar, it says in the pasuk, Ki kol soer v'kol dvash loy tektiri. Right? It says that yeast and honey should not be brought for a korban. What's wrong with yeast and honey? He tells us hatam sheneser haktarusam. The reason why we're not supposed to bring them for a korban is kisoy v'dvash hisoy dinai hagadlas dinai hakatnas. Soy and dvash, these two things represent din. One, he says, is a din on the level of godless, a higher level of din. The other says a level of din of katness. But anyways, it's din. The entire thing of korban is we're trying to elevate things and bring the world to a state of perfection and rachamim, and we don't want to get din mixed up in that. So he says that these two things represent din. Then he says in their names you see this, because Sa'or is Shin, Aleph, Reish, right? And that's Gematria Elohim the Yidin, Elohim Beribia. It's a gematria if you take out if you take the name Elohim and you spell it out with yids, so we aleph lamed pi lamed mem daled kai yid vav daled mem mem. Okay, that plus Elohim berabia, which is spelling out the Elohim letter by letter, aleph lamed hai yid lamed kai yid mem. Right, those two together, which are both, Elohim is a name associated with din. Those two together are gematria sa'or. And the Arizal brings this in Kavunas of Pesach also, in the idea of why during Pesach we don't eat sa'or, we don't eat what's it called, leaven, right, on Pesach, or leavened food, because the idea is that leaven itself is a b'chin of din, and at that time we're trying to draw down rachamim and chesed, because of course Pesach is connected to chesed, right? So that's sort of a connection to Pesach. And then he says, "V'hem soy dinai katnus." So the soor is dinam of katnus, and that's why it's associated with name Elokim. It says dvash. The word dvash, honey, is gematria shin vuf. It's gematria 306. Hemsoid shach dinim the godless, and that's connected to 320 dinim. You know the we're told in the Zohar. There's talks about there's 320 koiches of din, but what I mean here is it's only gematria shin vuf, so it's less than 320. It tells us v'chusar yedal it's missing 14. Besoid hashoifer v'yad hoichezes boy, which is the idea of the shofar and the yad that's holding the shofar. What he means to say is, in the korbanos of Rosh Hashanah, we have this, that you have that the word shofar itself, the Zohar tells us in some places there's 320 dinim, in different places the Zohar tells us there's par dinim, there's 280 dinim. And the Arizal explains that over there in korbanos Rosh Hashanah, he explains that there's really two different types of dinim. There's dinim associated with za and dinim associated with nik. So the par dinim, the 280 dinim are associated with nik, then the shach dinim, the 320 dinim are associated with za. But then the word shofar is par plus shin vuv, so it's also missing 14 to come out to 420 to 320, and then the Arizal says the yad, the hand that's holding the shofar, yad is gematria 14, so you add 14 to 306 and you get 320, and so he's saying it's a similar idea over here. So the honey itself, the dvash itself, is a remus to what's it called to this idea. That's also why we eat honey on Rosh Hashanah, right? Because it's also associated with this idea that you have the honey, and you dip your bread or the apple, both, right, into the honey. So then that's your hand. That's 14 coming together with the shin vov, which is the dvash, the honey itself, right? And that's a mitik that sweetens those entire 320 dinim. The Arizal tells us over here that this is the idea that all these that both of these things, the soor and the dvash, are connected din, so we don't bring them on the for a korban. So because they're dinim, we don't bring them into the Beis Hamikdash. And now he's going to sort of explain a little bit more on these concepts we discussed over here, where he says mitzvahs al kol korban chotakriv melech. He's going to go a little bit more into the idea of the idea we need to have the Chazal. The Torah tells us that every single korban needs to be brought with salt. So he explains. Nizbarat slaini b'shar pnimi v'chitzen b'drish aleph ein sham al nevar b'kitzer miflig. So he says he discusses somewhere else more in detail. He's going to tell us briefly. Ki'akiras shel nefesh habahamis shaba'udam, that we have in our neshama, we have, of course, a nefesh riach neshama chai yechida. The lowest part of that nefesh is nefesh habahamis, is the animal soul, right? And that's the part of our neshama which is very ingrained and very dependent on the physical body, right? And of course, and that's going to manifest as the darker parts of our nature, right? That's what he calls it akiris. It's like foggy. It's like unclear, right? Because that part of the neshama is associated with the physical, and that's where a person can succumb to certain types of desires and things. If a person eats, he's hungry, hasn't eaten for a while, eats very ravenously, right? That's not really becoming for a spiritual being to behave in that way. But that comes from that part of us, and so too all the thoughts that we have, that are thoughts that go against Kedusha, the desires, taivas that we have, right? So all these things come from that aspect. And he tells us, Kisha el nefesh da asiya lizim emeni, and this nefesh bahamas has to sort of rise up into the neshama, into the levels of holiness, to get its muzan, to get its sustenance, right? So in other words, this nefesh bahamas has to be attached to the nefesh elokiz, and to the riach, which is higher than that, and the neshama, which is even higher than that, and chai nechida, it's all attached. So when it sort of moves up to that realm of kedusha to draw its sustenance, it causes those the energies of those higher levels of the soul also to be somewhat disrupted and affected by it, which will cause that person to do a sin, right? And that which causes this is the fact that this the nefesh bahamas, Right? That's what pulls us to sin and to transgress against Hashem. When a person sins, the tikkun is makriv korban nefesh behaima shel balachayim. Person has to then bring a korban, which is an animal, right? Shehem garmi loy lachtoi, because that's really who sinned, right? So this is a new dimension in the korban. The korban is who really sinned here. The nefesh of the real neshama of the person wants to be attached to Hashem all the time. It was that animalistic aspect of the person that brought him to sin. So therefore, that's what really needs to atone, right? So you bring an animal which has a nefesh of Bahamas, has an animal soul, right? In order to be mechaper for that neshama, for that nefesh of Bahamas in the person, right? It's a very good Shlomo, right? And the kapura is associated with this concept too, right? So he tells us, "V'nuchas aish gvoya." So there comes a fire from the heavens, the soid of oisan havirus, and burns up those virus. It burns up that nefesh Bahamas, and atones for the virus that the person's nefesh Bahamas caused for him. Al shorish nefesh Bahami shabaudam nimshech loy niki v'zakus. So then that nefesh, even that nefesh Bahamas in the person, through the korban, it's purified, it's cleansed, right? Through that fact that the korban atones for it and for the things that it causes the person to do, right? Because everything comes from one source. Because in other words, he's saying, how can it be that the nefesh of Bahamas that's inside the animal is going to atone for my nefesh of Bahamas which is inside me? They're two different nefesh of Bahamases. But the result is no, because they all come from the same source. It's all connected. Everything is connected together, right? So that atones for that nefesh of Bahamas within the person. So he says, understand with this you can understand well the secret of the korbanos. So, and then now he tells us, like similar to what we said before, and since if the nefesh of Bahamas is that detrimental to a person, then the nefesh that's nefesh hadoimim, nefesh hatzemayach, the vegetative soul, and the inanimate soul, which are even lower levels, then those of course are going to cause certain types of primal urges and things to manifest for the person, and they also need an atonement, need a kapura. He says that these also, the nefesh hadoimim and nefesh hatzemayach in the person, those cause nefesh Bahamas to do what it does, and to want its and to want the person to sin. So the Yetzer Hara is connected to all of these different levels, all these different subhuman levels, so to speak, right? So he tells us, and that's why we had all these different korbanos where it involved nesuchim, nesach hayayin, we pour wine, the siltas, and he mentions then the flour, right, of the korbanos. So sort of over here, he didn't mention this before, right? But flour also, of course, is an animal product, and it's also brought with many other korbanos, right? Shem tzemayach v'doimim, and that sort of elevates those levels. And that's why it says, I'll call korban chatakriv melach. It says that every single korban should be brought with salt. Koyach doimim. That's the koyach of the doimim, of the inanimate, which that also needs its tikkun. And with that, with the korban, you elevate all of those levels, as we mentioned before.
It can be said that like whenever you eat bread, you should always put salt on it.
Right. Yeah, this is associated. It's also a similar idea. Because the idea of the Arizal tells us that the shulchan of the person's table, person's suda that he eats, is in a certain sense like a korban on a mizbeach, right? Because the idea is, okay, you're eating it, but the idea is that if you're eating with the right intentions, you're eating the food in order to have koyach to serve Hashem, right? So then it comes out that in essence you're doing the same type of an atonement, the same type of a tikkun, right? So therefore we also use salt in order to elevate that doimim aspect too, to elevate that inanimate aspect as well. Very good. Okay. So now he tells us, "V'hinai mitzvahs korbanos." The mitzvah of the korbanos nizbar b'shar pnimi v'chitzur. Okay, so he tells us explain this because he's going to explain. He explains it more in detail in the next Chaim. Kfar yodata mashkos of etzlaini b'yin chet udam arishin Aichuzer ve'iriv hara im hatoif. So we have this concept by Udam Arishan. When Udam Arishan sinned, he went and he mixed up evil with good. Right? V'gavri klippus, and then the klippus were able to strengthen themselves. So basically the idea is that when the Udam Rishon was created, the world was in a certain state of tikkun, a certain state of elevation, and the Ra and Toiv were divided and separated from each other. The Eitzadas Toiv Ra, right? That Eitzadas Toiv Ra is the mixing of the good and the evil together. Udam Rishon thought that he's going to eat from the Eitzadas, and that Eitzadas is going to make him like Hashem, that he knows good and evil, but he didn't understand what it's going to do. Is since he's a being that's by definition a mix of neshama and gif, of good and evil elements. So eating from that Eitzadas, awakening him to the idea of evil, he's not going to be able to keep those things in separate categories. The whole thing's going to become one mumbo jumbo. And that's exactly what happened when he ate from the Eitzadas, and that's what we're struggling with till today. A lot of times we struggle with these things, right? What's the right decision to make in a certain situation? What's the right thing to do, right? And even in food, I'm eating food. Am I really eating this just
This always ties in with, like, it plays around with that free will area that's so cloudy with the Arizal and all this stuff I've been hearing recently from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Right, but so the idea is that everything gets all mixed up, right? And that's what happened when the Mishnah ate from night Sadas, and that allowed the Klippas to regain a certain measure of control over the world. So he says, "V'nimtza," so it comes out, "Shepugam b'chol ha'olamus." So it comes out that Udam Rishon, in essence, he damaged all of the worlds. And now there needs to be a new tikkun for that which he damaged, right? So in other words, it's not enough the fact that there was already a tikkun to do, because when Udam Rishon was created, all the nitzotzes that were in the physical world haven't yet been elevated, right? But now there's even more of a tikkun to do because of the chet that Udam Rishon did with the Eitzadas. So there needs to be more of a tikkun and more of an elevation to be done. And therefore, that's why Hashem commanded the korbanos. Which the korban includes in itself all of the four elements, right? Right? Kadai she is bari kilam. And elements here in this context doesn't mean fire, water, those ones. He means these ones we've been talking about, these different levels of creation. Yisoid doimim, you have the element of the inanimate, which is melach, the mayim, that's the salt and the water, right? I guess mayim, he means probably like nisach hamayim that we do on sikkus, on the mizbayach, right? Shehi besoid hasiya, and that's connected to the hasiya. Yisoid tzemayach, the element of plant life, is the soil is Hashem and v'yayin, the flour and the oil and the wine. Mesoid Yitzira, and that's going to be connected to Olam Yitzira. Yisoid Balachayim, then you have the animals that you bring on the korban. Tzoin v'bukar v'behimus, you have sheep and cattle among the domesticated animals. V'toirim v'nayoyna ba'oif, and you have the what's it called, the pigeons and the doves in the bird kingdom, right? Mesoid bria, and that's all part of the animal life. That's the connected Olam Bria. And then Hamishtadlim, Kaihanim Bavaidusam, Leviim B'dechunam, V'Yisrael B'mamudam. Then you have the people that are involved in the korban, which involve all three types of Klal Yisrael. The korbanos are the Kohanim are doing the korbanos, the Leviim are singing their song, the Yisrael are standing and saying their tefillas, right? V'Habalim Hamakrivim Atzmam, and then also the people that are bringing the korbanos themselves, right? All of that is beside the tzilas. That's connected the level of medaber, right? So everything's involved in the korban. Vesh nechel le ishim asiya, and then he says that there are those korbanos which are entirely consumed by fire, right? And that's asiya, rayach, yitzir, and then there's the idea of rayach nechoyach, the idea that it's a pleasant fragrance, which connected to yitzira, connected to riyach, like it told us before. Nechoyach is bria, and lashem is atzilas, like we said at the beginning. He says v'itzichi lekol zeh, and the reason why we need all this, he says da. Or the klippa, when those netzitzes of light, those sparks of light, fell into the klippa, miktusam nafli bedoimim, miktusam betzemayach, miktusam balachayim, shayna medaber, miktusam bebalachayim medaber. Some of those netzitzes fell into what is going to manifest as inanimate object, and some of those netzitzes fell into what's going to manifest as plants. and animals and human beings. Lefikach Amar Arizal, that's why Chazal tell us, Ein lecho aisav she'ein lo yisar milmala shemakaloi v'gadai. There's various ways this is brought down in slightly different lashonis in place in Chazal, but there's a famous thing that there's not a single blade of grass that exists. It doesn't have a malach or a mazel or a koyach that's above it and it's telling it to grow. So in essence, the idea is that we're saying every single blade of grass is vibrant and full of life and full of the tzotzes, full of kedusha, right? And then so too, of course, all the animals and the entire the entire structure of everything that Hashem created in the world, right?
We also like associate energy with kedusha.
For sure, yeah. hmm Right, because everything has an energy, right? That's giving it that is animating it. Even the inanimate objects have an energy that animates them, that allows them to exist in their form that they're in, right? So it tells us, so this idea of there being such an energy that causes that thing to grow, right? Those are the tzotzes themselves that fell. That is what gives everything its life force and its ability to grow, right? Until finally the human being is the one that can bridge the gap, because he is the top level of that. The human being is the highest level of all of creation. So he's the one that can then bridge that gap and bring that creation to Hashem, right? So that's really our purpose in this world. Our purpose in this world here is to elevate everything to Hashem and not to damage it and ruin it further, right? Which is unfortunately what ends up happening a lot of the time, because we have this tremendous potential, but a lot of times we end up using it the wrong way, right? So this is what we're here for, is to bring everything up to Hashem. So he tells us, that we human beings, we have that potential to elevate the toiv from the klippa, to make things purposeful, to give things a purpose, and to elevate those things to Hashem. And therefore, at the time the Beis Hamikdash was standing, right? So then at the time the Beis Hamikdash, that korban was, those korbanos that were happening, was the essential thing that was raising up those netzotzes and bringing the world closer to perfection. That's what we have in the Beis Hamikdash was standing, right? And then of course when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, so that we became far less productive in what we were doing, because now we don't have that channel, that tremendous place where those netzotzes can be raised. But all hope is not lost, because the result tells us va'achshav, and nowadays hatfila b'mukam korban. Nowadays our tefillah, our davening, is in the place of the korban, right? And of course this is why the tefillah is so important, right? According to all of the mekabulim, right? Perhaps in the Chayder Hagru, in the Gru's Chayder, there was more of an emphasis on Torah. The Nefesh Chaim emphasizes more the aspect of Torah, because he says that the Bemis Torah is higher than Tefillah, because Torah is even higher than Atzilus, because Torah comes from Olam HaMalbush. Okay, but everybody else, the Baal Shem Tov and the Talmidei Baal Shem and the Rashash and the Mekabulim from the Rashash's school and the Ramchal, everyone else emphasizes that Tefillah is the Ikar avoid of a person nowadays. And even though we're doing tons of other mitzvahs too throughout the day and throughout and everything that we're doing, but the tefillah occupies a central position. There's more elevated, there's more insights being raised by tefillah than by anything else. That is like the korban that was at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, right?
I think it was like the Baal Shem Tov that said that, like, I'm not sure if it was the Baal Shem Tov, but he said that all the power, all the miracles that I do is because of my tefillah and the mikvah. Just those two.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
tefillah and mikvah.
Yeah, I think it was the Baal Shem Tov. Yeah. They were asking him, like, they were thinking that when he was doing miracles, they were thinking he was doing it through using some sorts of shaimus, some divine names or whatever it was. And he said, yeah, it's all in the koyach of the tefillah and the mikveh, right? Okay, so the result tells us lefikach. So therefore, hatfillah nechlekas zevayis chalukim. So that's why we have the tefillah is divided into two aspects: ivda v'melila. There's actions and there's the words. Knisk b'sayfer kavunas b'shar tefillah. Says as in shar kavunas, it's explained in shar kavunas. Over there, he tells us that there are 4 actions that we do in the morning. and those are going to parallel the 4 parts of the tefillah. So the 4 actions that we do is first we wash negel wasser, we wash our hands, and we go to the bathroom, right? And of course, wash your hands again after going to the bathroom. So that's action number 1. And then action number 2 is putting on the talis. Action number 3 is putting on tefillin shel yad. And action number 4 is putting on the tefillin shel rosh. Right? So we're doing these 4 things in the morning. These actions are actually very, very significant because they are going to parallel the 4 parts of the tefillah. The tefillah is also divided into 4 parts. And I'm talking about up until Shemona Esrei, because after Shemona Esrei is just descent, right? That we have korbanos is the first part of tefillah. That's moving up through Olam Ha'asiyah. Then you have Psika de Zimra is moving up through Olam Yitzira. Then you have Birchas Kriyashma is moving up through Bria, and then the Shemona Esrei is in Atzilus. And that's connected these 4 actions that we do in the morning, right? So these 4 actions in the morning are in essence the physical aspect of what that tefillah is afterwards going to be. When the tefillah itself is just dibra, it's just speech, right? I'm not sure exactly what he wants to show with this, because he seems to be connecting it because tefillah is mukam korban. That's why tefillah has these 2 aspects. Perhaps it's because the korban also has the 2 aspects, because the korban has the actual physical bringing of the korban. At the same time, the korban is not effective if the person bringing the korban is not doing tshiva. So you also have to have you have to have the korban itself and then the vidi, perhaps of the person who's what's it called, who's bringing the korban. So it has those 2 aspects of the physical and then the words which are higher than physical. And so too our tefillah has these 2 aspects.
Do you say
Anyway,
anything when you wake up? Is the first thing you do is Mudin?
Madani, yeah.
Yeah, Madachani, Fanaha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess what we should take out of all of this, right, is that there's a tremendous amount of things going on in everything, and the korbanos are a tremendous avoida, that everything was being elevated, right? Not only does it elevate the tzotzes that are there, but it also, like the Arizal told us, it atones for those neshamas that might be trapped within those animals or within the food that those animals were eating, and so on and so forth, right? And then also it atones for the person himself, because the person himself gets a kapura for his nefesh bahamas, for his animal soul, which caused him to do the sins that he did, right? And then when we move into the area of there's no more Beis Hamikdash nowadays, so what do we do now? So now tefillah, right? Tefillah is this avodah. So when we go to daven, we shouldn't think of it like something, because a lot of times the natural force of habit that a person has sort of gets them to think like, this tefillah is something I have to get to do, so let me just get it over with, right? Instead of that, we should take a few moments before we daven and remind ourselves of what's really happening when we daven and how powerful it really is and how important it really is. And hopefully with that'll give us like the boost and the fervor to be able to do the davening as best as possible. Because the Arizal tells us that every single day and every single tefillah is a whole different aspect of the higher worlds that we're repairing with that tefillah. Different tefillas are moving up with every shachris, every mincha, every mariv, right? So the idea is, and how well they're elevated has to do with how much kavon and how much intent and how much meaning was put into that tefillah, right? So therefore, every single tefillah needs to be. We need to try our best, Like I always say, Hashem wants us to try, right? Because we're not malachim, we're human beings and we're fallible, but Hashem wants us to try, right? So every tefillah we should try to put as much kavuna and intent into it, and there's no reason to rush, and there's no, okay, well, if someone has some kind of emergency appointment or something, okay, maybe it's different. But I'm saying stamazoi, there's no need to rush, and there's no need to when you're in Bismedrish, you're in a place where you, or even if you're davening at home with COVID, whatever the situation might be, I don't know, everyone's situation is different, right? Then you should just devote that time to this important avodah, which is the pinnacle of everything that we're doing, and the main thing really, be'emes, if it's done properly, that's raising up all those nitzotzes that we need to finish raising to bring Mashiach already, right? So we should have a lot of find a lot of meaning and joy from our tefillas. Hashem. All right, everyone. Shkoyach for participating. Next week, the shirim, we'll have to see exactly what the situation is going to be. I think beginning of the week we could still give the shirim. Maybe end of the week we should take a break because I may get busy over here. So look out for emails about that. All right, everyone, have a great Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi.
That was, yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Could the roof give something on Pesach next week?
Maybe we'll do something. Maybe on Tuesday, maybe. Bez Hashem.
Okay.
Send out an email about it. Bez Hashem, I'll send out. All right.
Good.
Both of everyone.
Thank you.